presentation a little bit. I will touch a little bit on global trends in O&P, but I think it is more appropriate to speak about the pathways that you could take to improve the prosthetic care of amputees in your countries. You know, when I talk about the developments in technology in the industrialized countries in Western Europe and in Northern America, this is interesting for you, but probably not really relevant for the care of your patients. The situation that we're having is that technology is progressing as fast as never before in human history. So when we look at the development in the phone and audio technology, then we can say it took about 100 years from the invention of the telephone to the first cordless stationary wired phone. And then in the past 25, 30 years, we had the development of the cell phones and smartphones, mini computers. And especially when we look at the first cell phone, and I can remember, I grew up in Germany and the first cell phone came to market back in the 90s. So it was a big machine that could be put in a car, and you know, the journalists were joking, well, this at the time costed around 10, 12,000 Deutschmarks, so 6,000 euros or US dollars. And it was almost impossible to lift it out of the car because the battery was so big and heavy. So and it took about 25 years until the iPhone came to market. And what is really interesting is, you know, when you look at all our cell phones that we have today have a higher processing power than any of the computers that the Americans used in their moon flight program. So technology is progressing, and the same we see in prosthetics. You know, when we look back, so the first reference to a prosthetic leg was back in 500 BC. And for many, many centuries, nothing really happened. So the first non-locking knee joint was invented around 1700. The first single-axis foot around 1800. The multi-articulating ankle 1858. So the first non-locking or polycentric knee joints were developed in the first 2 decades of the 20th century. And in 1919, Otto Bock founded the prosthetic company and revolutionized prosthetics a couple of times with the industrial production of components for prosthetics. So before that, all the joints, all the prostheses were really highly customized devices, and they're still highly customized devices. But we work with prefabricated components today, whereas back 100 years ago, everything was made from scratch in the workshops. So when we look at the last 50, 60 years, so, and I have marked the components that are the most prevalent now in countries like yours, the sedge foot. At the time, the prosthetic foot was launched in 1956. So in other fields of medicine, that is probably the day after the meteorite wiped out the dinosaurs or Stone Age. But in prosthetics, we're still using the sedge foot to a great extent. So in 1968, Otto Bock invented the modular prosthetics, the endoskeletal prosthetics as we know them today, And modular friction brake knees, the 3R15 was introduced in 1972, 4-bar knee, 3R20 was introduced in 1978. And many of the developments that we use today in Europe and Northern America came later. So the carbon fiber feet were introduced in the 1980s, and then in the early 1990s we had the first microprocessor swing control knee. The CTICC came to market 1997, the first microprocessor stance and swing control knee, and then you can see here, so in 2008 the first microprocessor controlled ankle foot, 2010 the first powered knee, 2011 the first powered foot. So that is the technology that we're talking about in North America and Western Europe today. But I think there are other ways for healthcare systems in countries like yours to improve the prosthetic care of your amputees without breaking the bank. And when we look back in history, there is a nice story. The Americans on their way to the moon, so they wanted to, the astronauts wanted to make their notes with ball pens. And they found out that a ball pen, a regular ball pen, doesn't work in zero gravity because the ink needs the gravity to leave the lead. So they invented a ball pen that works in zero gravity. They spent $1 billion back in the 1960s. I looked it up yesterday. $1 from 1965 today has a buying power of $8 2017 dollars. So they spent $8 million on the development of a ball pen. What did the Russians do? They faced the same problem. Well, they used pencils. So no need to develop such expensive stuff, and to stay in the picture. So when we're looking at such feet, friction brake knees, 4-bar knees, we can say that today we're using a blunt pencil. So, and you don't need that fancy technology of the ball pen that works in zero gravity. So what I would like to do today is to show you ways how you can improve. I want to give you a sharp pencil to improve the prosthetic care of your patients in your countries. So I think the biggest challenge that clinicians face today is that there is a plethora of components available on the market. And I've looked it up. I didn't talk with Stephen how many knees and feet we offer here in South Africa and in African countries, but I can tell you our portfolio for adult amputees in the United States is 36 different prosthetic feet and 28 different prosthetic knees. And the biggest challenge is to match the patient condition and the patient needs with these products. So do we really need so many? We will see that there are good reasons why we have such a variety of products to meet the patient's conditions and needs. So let's start with the feet. So there are 4 different types of feet: conventional feet, or such foot, other conventional feet, and the energy storage and return feet, the carbon fiber feet. So back in 2009, the Cochrane collaboration, and that is what I sometimes call the Supreme Court of Evidence-Based Medicine, they did a literature review to find out, is there high-level clinical evidence to show that one foot is better than the other. So they found almost 350 studies, but only 26 of them found mercy for methodological reasons. So more than 300 were excluded because the methodology was so poor that they couldn't draw any conclusions. And the verdict was that there is insufficient evidence from high-quality comparative studies for the superiority of any prosthetic foot. So, but low to moderate quality studies found that active transtibial and transfemoral prostheses amputees may benefit in walking speed and gait efficiency when they walk faster than 4 kilometers per hour or 1.1 meters per second from the flex foot, that was at the time the most studied carbon fiber foot, compared to the such foot and other conventional feet. So when we take a closer look into the studies with prosthetic feet, we can say who's the right candidate for a such foot. The such foot is actually a foot only for a person who works in a house, in a one-level house, and at a low speed, a patient who is very unstable, who needs stability over the whole gait cycle or the whole stance phase of gait, and has a rare need, no or only rare need, to ambulate slopes, stairs, and uneven terrain. The other conventional feet that are more dynamic, like the feet with flexible keels, single-axis feet and multi-axis feet, they are for limited community ambulators that walk in a certain but limited radius around their dwelling, around their house, with a medium speed of up to, a little faster than 0.3 meters per second, and they have an occasional need to negotiate slopes, stairs, and uneven terrain. The more active patients who have a need to walk faster than 1 meter per second or around 4 kilometers per hour, and who have a frequent need to walk longer distances and often have to negotiate slopes, stairs, and uneven terrain, for those patients, the carbon fiber feet are much more appropriate because they are more dynamic. They can store energy, they can return energy, so they help them really negotiate these difficult terrains. The problem with the carbon fiber feet is that there is a large variety in the properties that depends on the configuration of the springs, the lever arms of the springs, the stiffnesses of the springs, and that results in the fact that there is no ideal foot, no perfect foot for all terrains. So a foot that is really good for walking on level ground in the city is probably not the best foot when you live on a farm or in a rural area and you always have to walk on uneven terrain, or you live in a hilly area or mountainous areas where you have to negotiate slopes and hills. So it is very important to analyze and to walk through these important questions with the patients, what they do most of the time to find the best foot. And it's always the challenge to find the best compromise, because there is no perfect prosthetic foot. So it is not enough to just offer one carbon fiber foot. So you should think about offering a variety of carbon fiber feet and have the patient test them and find out what's the best foot for their individual condition and need. So let's come to the prosthetic knees. This is even a little more complicated. So the most important question when it comes to prosthetic knees is there are various classifications, and all of these classifications don't really help us to select the right knee for the right patient. And back in 2004, there was a publication from Otto Bock's head biomechanist at the time, unfortunately only in German, and he classified the knees by their ability to allow for controlled knee flexion in the weight-bearing condition. So why is this important? Controlled knee flexion during weight bearing is what we do with our quadriceps muscle when we lower the body down a stair or down a slope. When I walk down the slope here, my quadriceps stretches but produces resistance so that I don't fall down the slope or fall down the stair, but I can walk down in a controlled manner. And when we look at the abilities of prosthetic knees, so the controlled knee flexion during weight bearing simulates the eccentric action of the quadriceps muscle stretching against resistance for lowering the body down a slope or stair. So this is what we really need for slope and stair ambulation, for reciprocal slope and stair ambulation. So when we look at the knees, there are knees who don't allow any knee flexion during weight bearing at all. There are knees that allow for limited knee flexion, and there are knees that allow for full knee flexion. So the whole radius or range of motion. So the knees that don't allow for knee flexion are the locked knee. Well, this is locked all the time, unless I unlock it for sitting down. The friction brake knee, so that is the knee that is standard in many developing and emerging countries. So I'm not able to walk down a slope or stair reciprocally with a friction brake knee. This is technically not possible because it doesn't allow for knee flexion. Also, the four-bar polycentric knees don't allow for that. When we look at the knees that allow for limited knee flexion, there are the multi-axial knees that have more than 5 axes, so like the 3R60 of Otto Bock or the total knee, for instance, and knees that are additionally equipped with a stance flexion bumper or adapter. Can we switch off the other microphone? Is that still on? And the knees that allow for unlimited knee flexion that are hydraulic knees. So when I use a hydraulic unit, that is able to really lower the body down a slope or a stair, so that the patients may be able to walk in a more or less natural manner down a hill or slope in a city or staircases. So we look at the friction brake knees, and there are various types, and I can have only the time to touch on the basic mechanisms. So compared to a locked knee, a friction brake knee has the big advantage that it has a free swing face. So with a locked knee, I can only walk with a locked or stiff leg all the time. So it is locked in the stance phase, it is locked in the swing phase. A friction brake knee unlocks for the swing phase. I can swing the leg through. I have better toe clearance for that. But the problem with the friction brake knees is they have to be fully extended before heel strike to be safe. They don't allow for stance flexion that we need for shock absorption. So one big problem is when we use the knees that don't allow for stance flexion for shock absorption in level walking, is that patients usually develop low back pain over time. It does not allow for knee flexion at late stance. So when we walk as non-amputees, what we do is that we flex the knee already when we, in the late stance phase, we're still putting weight on the leg, but we're already flexing the knee. This is the normal gait pattern. With the friction brake knee, this is not possible. The friction brake knee has to be completely unlocked before I can flex it. So when patients use a friction brake knee, they have to relearn the whole gait cycle, and that is very important then when it comes to the rehabilitation team and the physical therapy. So the physical therapist needs to closely understand how the knees work and how the feet work to train the patients that they can properly use the prosthesis. And also, as I already said, it does not support reciprocal gait on uneven slope or stair descent. We look at the 4-bar polycentric knees. They're usually pretty safe at heel strike. The big benefit of all polycentric knees is that they can shorten the calf during swing, so they mimic the natural knee, so they produce improved foot clearance. They also allow for knee flexion at late stance, so a more natural gait pattern. When patients are trained to use a 4-bar knee, they can remain a more natural gait pattern and don't have to relearn everything. And they allow also for easy knee flexion for sitting down and shortening of the calf during sitting, and that produces a much more natural appearance. So the disadvantages of the 4-bar knees is they're only safe in full extension because the instantaneous center, they have a moving center of rotation, and when the knee is flexed, it moves downward to the knee quickly and becomes very unstable. They also don't allow any stance flexion for shock absorption, and they don't support reciprocal gait on uneven terrain and slope and stair descent. So that brings us to the polycentric knees that have more than 4 bars, or more than 4 axes. They may support for limited stance flexion for shock absorption, and also may support reciprocal gait on shallow slopes and slightly uneven terrain. So when we look at the 3R60 of Otto Bock, for instance, it allows for up to 15 degrees of stance flexion for shock absorption, and the stance flexion is controlled. It is buffered, and that is enough to walk on slightly uneven terrain and slopes with an inclination of up to 5 degrees. So when the slopes get steeper, this is not enough, but depending on what the patient really needs, what the patient encounters in his or her daily life, that might be enough for patients who live in a city, for instance. The disadvantages, as all mechanical knees, they require full extension at heel strike, and also these multi-axial knees do not support reciprocal gait on heavily uneven terrain or steeper slopes and stairs. And coming to the hydraulic knees, that is a knee that allows for full controlled knee flexion. It supports stance flexion for shock absorption, supports loading for sitting down, so it is easier to sit down because I don't have to bear the weight on one leg, on the sound leg only. I can also put some weight on the prosthetic leg. And it supports reciprocal gait on uneven terrain as well as slope and stair descent. However, also hydraulic knees have their disadvantages. So they also require full extension at heel strike. When we allow for more stance flexion than 5 degrees for level walking, we also need a function or a feature in the knee that is called stance extension dampening, because what happens otherwise is when I go in knee flexion and I move the body over the knee, then the knee stretches rapidly. So that is also called a knee jerk, or what patients often describe as buckling of the knee. When we allow for more stance knee flexion, we also need the extension dampening. Another issue is that the switch mechanism between stance and swing phase is very susceptible. So for unintentional switching. So the amputees must always be alert, and they must be physically fit so that they control the knee joint, or that they can fall in a way that they don't hurt themselves. So these hydraulic knees, these non-microprocessor controlled hydraulic knees, are only for very fit patients who have good coordination and muscle strength. Otherwise it would be too dangerous and we would put the patients at harm. So what I've developed, and I will also present it at the SPO meeting next week, is there is a kind of decision tree for the basic knee mechanisms. So it all starts with the question, is the patient able to control the stability of the knee under all circumstances and conditions? If this question can be answered with yes, so we have a very fit patient, good coordination, good muscle strength, then the hydraulic knee is the best solution for these patients, or what I call free choice, because not all patients like these full functional knees. So there are very fit, physically fit patients who prefer 4-bar knees for whatever reasons. So if they're able to control the knee at all times, absolutely fine. If we have to answer this question with no, then there comes the next question. Is the patient able to flex the knee at terminal stance? So is the patient able to walk with a gait pattern that is pretty close to the natural gait pattern? And that brings us to the next slide. So if this question is answered with yes, then we have to answer, then we have to ask another question. Does the patient want to or have to negotiate uneven terrain, slopes, and stairs? If so, I'll come back to that on the next slide. If this question has to be answered with no, if the patient is not able, not physically fit enough to walk with that more natural gait pattern with the knee flexion in the late stance phase, then we have to ask the next question. Is the patient able to reach full knee extension prior to heel strike? Because that is what all knees require to be safe. If that question can be answered with yes, then this is a candidate for a friction brake knee. If this question has to be answered no, the patient cannot make sure that the knee is fully extended prior to heel strike and thus safe, then the question is the patient able to unload the prosthesis and unlock it for sitting down? If yes, then I can give him a locked knee. If no, the patient is probably better off with a so-called hyper-stabilized 4-bar knee that during walking looks like a locked knee. It is almost impossible to initiate the swing phase, but for sitting down, I don't need to unlock it. I just need to reposition the leg to bring the weight force behind the knee to flex it. So when we have those patients who are able to flex the knee in the late stance phase, And we have that question answered with yes, does the patient want to or have to negotiate uneven terrain, slopes and stairs? Then we have a split answer or split next question. Does the patient have to negotiate steeper slopes and stairs, or only shallow slopes and slightly uneven terrain? So with steeper slopes and heavily uneven terrain, a hydraulic knee is the best solution because that allows for controlled knee flexion over the full range of motion. If the patient only has to negotiate shallow slopes, slightly uneven terrain, a multi-axial knee may be enough. If the patient doesn't have to or doesn't need to negotiate uneven terrain, slopes and stairs, then the question is the patient able or willing to walk with stance flexion on level ground for shock absorption? There is very important to understand not all patients like that. Some patients feel unsafe, feel unstable when the knee is giving in and producing knee stance flexion, so they prefer that the knee is completely stable and doesn't move during the stance phase. So if the patient wants to walk with stance flexion on level ground, then he needs a polycentric knee with more than 5 axes, like the 3R60. If not, then a 4-bar knee is the better solution. It doesn't have stance flexion, but produces improved foot clearance due to the functional shortening of the calf in the swing phase. So this is all on one slide, pretty busy, but I think it underlines why there is such a variety in prosthetic knees, why we need so many different prosthetic knees to address the conditions and the needs of our patients with non-microprocessor controlled knees. So in summary, so we again have these 3 groups of knee joints that don't allow for controlled knee flexion, limited or unlimited knee flexion, which is also referred to as yielding. So the knees that don't allow for knee stance flexion, they are good for reciprocal gait on level ground. What they don't support is they don't support stance flexion for shock absorption, and they also don't support reciprocal gait on uneven terrain, slopes and stairs. The knees with limited knee flexion, they allow for reciprocal gait on level ground, for stance flexion for shock absorption, and also reciprocal gait on slightly uneven terrain and shallow slopes. They don't support reciprocal gait on heavily uneven terrain, steeper slopes with an inclination of more than 5 degrees, and for stair descent. Hydraulic knees allow for shock absorption and also for reciprocal gait on all kinds of terrains, but be aware, the switching mechanisms are very vulnerable, very susceptible. The patient has to be alert and fit enough to prevent a fall or to fall in a manner that doesn't result in an injury. So in general, what we can say is there is a reciprocal relationship between stability, and with stability I mean that the knee is able to prevent a knee collapse during weight bearing, and the function is supported. So the more stable the knee is, so the less likely it is to collapse during weight bearing, the less function it supports, and vice versa. So the hydraulic knees support nice function, but they're very susceptible. So they're only for well-trained, really fit patients with good coordination and muscle strength. And what we also have to look at is that this kind of stability, just collapse during weight bearing, is not the same as safety. When we talk about safety, there are more components. So there's also stability during walking on uneven terrain, slopes and stairs. There's the question of enough toe clearance, and for instance, additional features of the knee like stumble recovery. Is the knee able to recover the patient from a stumble? And what I can say is that non-microprocessor knees, all the knees that we've discussed so far, are not able to provide stumble recovery. That is where the microprocessor knees come into play. With these mechanical knee joints, I always have to find a compromise for an individual patient. So how much stability does the patient need? How much function does the patient need? What is the basic condition of the patient? I always have to find a compromise between function and safety. Only microprocessor knees have been able to marry these two aspects. So they provide superior safety. It has been shown that they reduce stumbles and falls, they reduce indicators of the risk of falling, they provide improved balance and improved confidence. But they, at the same time, they also provide improved function. So improved negotiation of stairs, slopes, obstacles, uneven terrain, reduced cognitive demand. So when patients walk and want to do something, carry objects or talk on the cell phone, for instance, this has been also shown to be improved with microprocessor knees, potential to improve overall mobility level and superior patient preference and quality of life. And we have meanwhile almost 50 peer-reviewed English language publications on the CTICC and 14 on the Genium and the X3. So that are the most studied prosthetic components in the world, whereas for the mechanical knees, well, we all sometimes call them traditional knees. And when we look back, what kind of research was done in the 70s and 80s, in hindsight, from today's perspective, we wouldn't even call that research. So in here, a couple of videos. So you see on the right-hand side a patient with a hydraulic knee, with a Bock hydraulic. So you can see that she's able to walk down that hill with reciprocal gait, step over step. But compared to the CTICC, she walks sideways to apply some braking forces so that the force doesn't pull her down the hill. And also look at her face, look at her head. She watches every step. And with the CTICC, she walks down the hill straight. And she looks around, she doesn't even watch the walkway. So this is a whole different level of confidence. Similarly, here, walking down a staircase. So you can walk down a staircase with a hydraulic knee, with a non-microprocessor controlled hydraulic knee in a reciprocal way. Not a problem. But I don't know any patient who would ever carry a child while doing that. So I think that is also very impressive. And here is a video. This patient this is very early in the rehabilitation process after the amputation. The patient uses a polycentric knee, and when you watch closely, when he turns around, you see that the knee is not fully extended. It is slightly flexed. When he turns around, so the left knee, you saw it was slightly flexed, that's enough. As soon as he puts weight on it, it collapses. The same patient, and could you start the other video, please? The same patient 3 months later with a CTICC on a trail with a grandchild on his shoulders. And you see, well, the thing that I like the most is how he cleared that rock with circumduction, like nothing. So, and of course, what we have to say, this is not only the CTICC, this is not only the components. What is very important is the whole rehabilitation process. It requires a team to rehabilitate a patient as successful as this. And I think that is a challenge that we face in many countries, that the medical professions don't really work together in a way as they should or as they're supposed to be. So physicians, nurses, prosthetists, physical therapists, patient and the family, of course, also the family, have to work hand in hand. Well, just to give you a couple of examples here. So, in fact, that we're struggling with, even in industrialized countries, even in Western Europe and North America, is the fact that many surgeons don't really have an understanding of prosthetic technology and of prosthetic fitting. So they have to be aware of how prosthetics work so that they can prepare residual limbs that really support the fitting of a prosthesis and not prevent a prosthesis from being fitted. And you know, from my own experience, I went to medical school back in the 80s in Germany, and during my internship in surgery, an amputation was a surgery for the youngest assistant doctor. So this should never happen. An amputation is an operation for an experienced surgeon. Also, the rehab physician should consult prosthetists to provide a comprehensive clinical picture and learn from the prosthetist about the available prosthetic options. Most physicians, you know, when I think back, I think there was only one lecture of 90 minutes on prosthetics and orthotics in the orthopedic curriculum. So physicians usually don't have a comprehensive overview on what prosthetic options are available for the patient. The prosthetist should consult with a rehab physician and on all conditions that may limit the successful outcome of prosthetic fitting and rehabilitation. So especially when it comes to appraising the prognosis of the patient. So when I have a patient who sustained the amputation in a trauma but is otherwise healthy, that's an easy fix. But in Europe and North America, we're dealing with patients with diabetes, with peripheral arterial disease, and usually it's not only the leg that is affected, so but also other parts of the body, cerebrovascular disease, cardiovascular disease. That is also something that are conditions that need to be considered. The prosthetist has to teach the physical therapist about the features and the function of the prosthetic components, because the physical therapist needs to know how the components work. That's the only way how I can train a patient to safely and functionally operate a prosthesis. And the physical therapist, they also should have an understanding, because otherwise, if I teach the patient, or if I don't have an understanding of how a component, of how a knee especially works, then it is impossible to train the patient how to operate the prosthesis safely. So when I have a patient who uses a non-microprocessor hydraulic knee, it is very important to train falling with them. And to train them, you know, if the knee buckles, if the knee is about to collapse, how can I stabilize the knee, or how can I fall to not hurt myself? So it is a big interplay. There are a lot of ways how you can improve the prosthetic care of patients, of amputees in your countries. There is a lot of components available that don't break the bank. But what is also, I think, the very important message of mine for today is that, and that is what we have to work on in Europe and North America as well, is to improve the collaboration within the whole rehab team. So all the medical professions have to work together to achieve a successful rehabilitation of our patients. Thank you.